Hello, all, and welcome to the Fantasy and Sci-Fi Fanatics podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Coolbaugh. Today, I have me a very special guest, Martin Dukes. Martin, how are you doing today?
Oh, good, thank you.
Oh, excellent, excellent. I'm so happy anytime I can get connect with somebody on Twitter or TikTok, and then talk to them and interact with them, and then get them on the show. I always consider those two my water cooler, so to speak. So it's always nice when I can interact with somebody and then get them on the show. So I really appreciate you for coming today. And we'll start.
Very, very glad to be here.
Oh, excellent, excellent. I appreciate it. We'll start right with that first question, Martin. What has your writing journey been like up until this point?
Well, I'm sure you can tell by looking at me that it's been quite a long journey. So I sure, like many authors, I've been writing and ever since I could first form the letters. I remember when, as a very small child, writing and putting together little books about my teddies.
Oh, that's cool.
And then giving them to my friends. And when I was at school, this is back in 1970, I suppose, I actually produced a school magazine.
Oh, that's cool.
Because this was before the days of photocopying, before a photocopier was even a sparkle in the eyes of Mr. Xerox or whatever. So I wrote this magazine out by hand, all 12 pages of it. And then I gave it to my friends to read, and they passed it around. And then I had to write it out more times. So you can imagine it was that tedious. It never really got past the first edition.
Yeah.
But I kept on with it. I've always been very, very keen on my English lessons, and language in general has always been important to me. And I suppose I really got going on it when I was in my late teens, when for my 18th birthday, I had an electric typewriter, which is a big advance on what I'd previously had. I don't know. I mean,
yeah.
if you show a typewriter to kids nowadays, what is that? But having an electric one, it was absolutely wonderful. I just can't imagine how people actually used to write novels using a typewriter, because you had to go back and correct things with Tipex or the white strips every few moments. So that was certainly a big step forward for me, and I got some ideas for some novels there, and so I started putting those together. A couple of years later on, I had finished my first novel and tried to get that published. So again, like very many authors, I've got drawers full of rejection slips. I did get an agent briefly, and I'd written this story about this boy who finds himself stranded in this sea or ocean, it was called the archipelago of lots of islands. And you could only go anywhere once on this island. So obviously, whenever you went to one of these places, you had to be pretty sure that you'd accomplished everything you needed to do on every one, because you were never able to go back.
Oh, interesting.
So the agent was quite happy with that, but unfortunately, I'd written it in the first person perspective, and she wanted quite a lot of changes, and she wanted to put it into third person. And I got a lot of other things going on at the time, and I just got fed up with the whole exercise in the end. So that was it for a few years, really. Then I came back to it, and I started to evolve the ideas for my first published novel, which is A Moment in Time. Although in its first manifestation, it was called Caught in a Moment. So that was my second complete novel. So I think when you're starting out writing, it can be very daunting, just the whole idea of finishing a whole book. It just seems such a vast undertaking.
Yeah.
And when you feel like just getting one chapter right is itself a mountain to climb. Just getting 80,000 words out or whatever seems like it's an impossible dream. So it was brilliant to have actually finished that. And I kind of felt, well, got one done now, so the next time I do this, it's going to be easier, which has proved to be the case, actually. But the first one, again, I went through the usual process of trying to get agents, approaching publishers. That didn't work. Again, more rejection letters, and eventually I decided to self-publish. So I did. That was very much a sort of learning journey as well. And I got that out. I got a sequel out for it called Worm Winds of Zanzibar, and a final episode in a trilogy, which is called the Alex Truman Chronicles, to complete that. However, I'm sure you know yourself as a teacher, writing is one thing, but the social media attention and effort that you need to put in as well, particularly as a self-published author, makes the writing part look like a walk in the park.
Yep.
And I'd been promoted at work, and I was in a very demanding job, which I was loving, absolutely loving, but it was taking an awful lot of things to make it what I wanted it to be. And I just didn't feel that I could put the effort into the marketing. So also, I must have been crazy to have produced a trilogy, because if your first book doesn't sell much, what chance have you got with the second and the third?
But they always say for indie though that really you don't pick up, sales don't pick up to book 2. So the thing I've noticed recently is, like, a couple of my friends who have released book 1 and then, let's say, did the audiobook. The audiobook did a little bit better recently, but then they went and did like a novella, like a prequel novella, gave it away, sold it at some point. And then as soon as like book 2 came out, though, all of a sudden audiobook sales in particular picked up. It's so interesting to see the patterns. I mean, I'm not a big math person. Obviously I teach social studies, but I absolutely love patterns because I study patterns in society, and have for 3 decades now. And to me, it's just interesting to see how the market has shifted from when I first realized what indie publishing was about 8-9 years ago. I met Kevin Hearn. I met Michael J. Sullivan, Brandon Sanderson, Patrick Rutherfus, and like Brian McKellen. All those people besides Kevin Hearn were like pretty much like brand new. And to see where they've gone in the last like 9 years, and what indie publishing has become, I mean, it's pretty crazy when you think about it. And a lot of the things that worked for them don't work now. So
yeah. Well, this was back in 2012 when I brought out the first book, and I think things have changed a lot. Yeah, I think indie publishing, like you say, is really taken off now, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, so one thing I liked when I saw your Twitter post, like the first time, I was just kind of like, I can't remember which one it was, but it really like stood out to me. And I was like, well, clearly this has something to do with time travel. It's sci-fi of some sort of nature. And that immediately grabbed my attention. And then when I saw, I don't know if it was book 2 or book 1, but I saw the cover and I thought, oh, that looks really interesting. I'm a huge design person. I originally wanted to be an illustrator. So the style of your covers really caught my attention. So I had to go instantly, to Goodreads to figure out what your books were about. And then I just was like, follow. And then I definitely added them like right away with Kindle. But yeah, I think you have such a great blurb, by the way, particularly for book 1. I really liked it. It seemed to flow really well. I don't want to give it away until we get to the questions, but yeah, I mean, it immediately, grabbed my attention. So I think it's really hard for some people, to put those things together. I've seen quite a few authors, for Writers Lift or different things where I've had people ask me personally, like, we talk to a lot of authors and, you do this and that in the community, like, what should I do? And I'm like, well, a better cover would be one, maybe, tweak the title. Blurbs are just the biggest one. Because if I go to a blurb, and one of my friends recently, I'm going to secretly send him a message and say, hey, I think, if you want a little bit of help, I'm not the best, but I do know people to hook you up with. I think blurb is kind of, hurting some people a little bit. And I think it's it's hard, right? Because you, like you said, you have to write the book, but then you have to sell it. And like, who would think that you'd have to write a really good blurb, you know?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the two things that sell your book is the cover and the blurb.
Yep.
And I was very lucky with that, because I'm glad you drew you in, because I came back into, after some period away, like I said, I was very busy with my job.
Yeah.
Then I started to get interested again and approach some publishers. I was very fortunate to be picked up by Provoco Publishing in this country. And it was Jay Murray of Provoco who said, yeah, you really need to pick that blurb. What the original one was not as good, but she wrote that blurb essentially. And I think it's just right, isn't it? And it gives
yeah.
You've got to be careful not to give too much away.
Yep.
But I think it's just enough to entice and to draw you in, doesn't it? So I've been able to take care of my own covers, because the thing I taught for 37 years was graphic design. So
oh wow. Well, that makes total sense to me then. Yeah.
And of course that has become incredibly easy by comparison with what it was when I first started teaching. Because when I first started teaching, I was teaching graphic design without computers, without Photoshop in particular. So, you used to do poster design with the kids, and okay, here's your poster with your dog food tin, and you're promoting this product. And even if the kids could draw an amazing dog food tin, really nice picture of a dog behind, landscape, as soon as they come to put a title on it, it was ruined. Who can hand draw text? Kids.
Yeah. I remember doing that project like really, really early in high school. I think it was like sophomore year or something like that. And I remember like everything was great because like I drew pretty well, but then I couldn't fit all of my words right. So, everything just looked off, and it just like threw the entire thing off.
I've seen so much of that. Yeah. I mean, I suppose there's a limitation to what I can do with book covers, because I cannot draw well enough to be an illustrator. I can draw well enough to teach art in up to secondary school level. That's no problem at all. But when you see some of the illustrated covers on fantasy books, they're amazing, aren't they?
Oh, Felix Ortiz. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
So talented people out there.
Yeah. Well, like the one day, I had actually got a hold of Felix, and I said, I need to figure out this type of style. And I said, don't know what it's called, and I was trying to look it up, and I asked a couple artists, and everybody like blew me off that I knew on social media. And he was like the most busiest, I feel like, because he had like 3 covers that I found out later on was like back to back to back. So he was very polite, said, oh, it's about to be, this was in the summer. He's like, oh, it's about to be, 9 o'clock here. I'm with my kids, I will get back to you as soon as I can. I wake up the next morning, it's like 6 a.m., so it's got to be like, I think him and I are only like an hour and a half difference. So, I'm like, what is going on? And he goes, well, I was talking about commissions. I was trying to commission him or someone. He goes, you're going to be spending like $2,000. He goes, you should really just look up this art style and then find some sort of, because I just wanted like a banner, like a cool banner. And like, he literally saved me like, at least like $1,000. But I'm like, then I was like, well, I was already a fan of his art, but he just like proved, he's just a really good guy. And I know a lot of people that, talk about him and stuff. So I messaged him the other day because he had this hunter with these 2 dogs that was just absolutely exquisite. And it blew my mind. I had to pull over on the side of the road because it just kept sticking in my head. And then he did another one for somebody and has this cool warrior. And I said, well, that looks very Conan, like very Robert E. Howard. And then he sent it to tag me and one of my other friends, Scott Oden. So Scott's written like some Conan stories and things, and we were just freaking out. Yeah.
Frank Frazetta.
Yep. Oh, he looks. They look just like Frank. I mean, it was crazy. A little bit updated color scheme, but yeah, it was like you could literally hold Frank's and his side by side. Print them out, and you wouldn't be able to tell the difference.
I mean, it's about visualization. To be able to see something in your head and then get it out onto the page. That's a real skill, isn't it?
Yeah, well, he said that in an interview on Wizards, Words, and Words. He's like, yeah, it's just this, because you guys do it all the time for writing. And I just laughed because I thought to myself, like, yeah, but you do it so much better than most of us do for writing, I told him on Facebook one time, I messaged him, I was like, love this one piece. I said, I hope one day to be able to, describe a character or a story that well, where it really feels like it's alive. And some people like him are just so, so amazing at doing that. I think that's why, just to bring it back to, your covers, I think that's why, that pulled me in, because I felt like your character was alive, if that makes sense. Like I was really able to visualize the genre, the character, and it really just had the overall feel. And I've seen a lot of similar stories to yours that don't quite have the feel, if that makes sense. It felt very, I don't know. So I guess some of the classic covers for like the Time Machine that I really like, and some other ones, that were similar in terms of sci-fi genre and things like that. A lot of the same color schemes and things like that. So kind of felt like it was very nostalgic, I guess is a good way to put it. So
absolutely. Well, the other ones in the series, there's a scheme essentially. They all feature my son.
Oh, that's cool.
So he's the model. So when I took I knew I was going to require, because there are eventually going to be 5 books in the series.
Oh, okay, cool.
I knew I was going to have to take an awful lot of photographs.
Yeah.
It was going to take me maybe 3 or 4 years to write the series. And he was already, I think, 18 when I took the photographs. So it's not going to work if he's too old, really.
Yeah.
It's already perhaps a bit borderline. So I banked a huge amount of still images and bits of video.
Idea.
So I've got those in the bank ready for all the covers as I need them, essentially.
That's a really good idea. I have to think about that for the future.
I must not fall out with him. That's it.
Yeah. But I really like the one, where did I see it? Yeah, because it was book 2 that I just looked up on Amazon earlier, and I hadn't seen Warm Winds of Zanzibar yet for that cover. It absolutely looks amazing, where he's kind of like looking back behind him. That was like an amazing color scheme. So I don't know how he came up with that, but that was like really cool.
In the first one, I think it partly reflects his growth as a person, as a character throughout the series. In the first one, I think you'll agree, he's got a kind of hunted look as he's running into the page. In the second one, he faces some most appalling traumas, but at the end he kind of finds his inner strength, and he realizes he just has to stick up for himself. And I think you can see that in the pose, which is striking.
Oh, for sure.
That image there.
Yeah, it's a very striking pose. It really culminates and emanates like a lot of strength there. So yeah, that was really cool. Oh, well, that leads us perfectly into question 2. So what genres do you currently write in, and how did you choose your genre or genres?
I almost think genres choose you.
Oh, I like that. I'm gonna have to take that. I will quote you, but I'm gonna use that as an advertisement. So, that's really good.
I think there's a sense that what you read, what you enjoy, kind of speaks to you.
Yeah.
And it makes you feel that you want to contribute in that area. So I've always been, and right back as far as I can remember, really, I've always been fascinated by fantasy worlds. I remember as a kid, going to the beach and stopping at the newsagents at the top of the drive down to the beach and picking up Michael Moorcock. Do you know?
Oh, I love, yeah.
I used to get through those at an amazing rate, and I still love his work. And Elric of Melnibone, and
they have a brand new graphic novel that
really?
Last year. Oh yeah, and then they just brought out like the collection at Barnes and Noble here. And I think my friend said that they just had the new one at Chapters. The cover is just, it really did an amazing job to display just him in his, just his presence. I mean, it was really cool. Yeah.
I mean, it got so many aspects to his work, which I think were visionary, really.
Yeah.
At the time when people weren't doing it, I mean, like the Melnibone, the ancient doomed empire, and and also some of his really more outlandish flights of fantasy. Like, have you read the Dances at the End of Time trilogy?
No, but I haven't. I've just not read it yet.
Yeah, I recommend it.
Oh,
Need
yeah.
to
Oh,
read
that's a
that
good
as well.
recommendation.
It's just extraordinary flights of imagination and humor as well. Some of his works really, really makes me laugh.
Oh, that's
So
awesome.
yeah, there was that, of course. Also, like Alex Truman in my books, I was always, during the more tedious lessons in school, you'd find me doodling little maps on, on the back of my exercise books and peopling it with little cities and drawing rivers and forests and then populating these places and giving them names. And I think it's a short step from there really to actually making up stories that actually occur in these lands that you've created. I know it is a very common preoccupation of people. I think most fantasy writers have done exactly that.
Very true. Very true.
So, have you got a land where your own work is? Have you got something, a place in your head where your own characters and stories are going to be acted out?
Yeah. So when I was illustrating, my teacher for art had said something very similar, and he said, well, he wanted us to do an alphabet book. And it was a very intricate process. It had to have binding, covers, like all these things. And we were literally learning about, like Gutenberg printing press, the, different wooden slack letters and things like that from China. It was just he was an amazing teacher. And one day I was like, he always saw me writing. And I loved Forgotten Realms. I was trying to submit to Forgotten Realms. They had like a contest where you could submit a story, and then that's how they found some of their authors. So I've been working on it for about 5 years. So I had kind of like my own thing going by then. And he goes, well, instead of doing I said, I don't really want to do any of the topics that he had. So being the genius, I'm going to have to find him one of these days and tell him that, when I get my first book published next year, like, this is because you said this. But he literally said to me one day, he was kind of frustrated with me because I tried that for the alphabet book, and I didn't like anything. And finally goes, you're always writing your own stories. He goes, why don't you just do the ABs to, A to Z alphabet on characters or places or both from your own fantasy world? And I literally was playing D&D for the first time at that time, and it just like blew my mind. And I was like, wait, I can do that? And I think that's one reason why I also got into education, because I had teachers like him that, use my interests to try and garner something. So I literally went A through Z, created all these characters, all these species, all these races, all these places. And some of them I still use today. I actually went back and revamped it and updated it with a lot of different philosophy and themes and things like that, made it a lot deeper. But there would be no book in my fantasy world without him saying that to me. So I'm really glad that he pushed me.
That really is what makes teaching worthwhile, isn't it? To know that you've made a difference to someone, and you've set them on a particular path in life, and essentially.
Yeah. Well, it's cool because like sometimes I get too distracted, as my friend says, with my job. And I'm like, well, my job is, is kids. So I said, it's not too, I don't get as much writing done as maybe some people, but at the same time, I'm like, oh, well, I'll get to it later. I'm pretty disciplined about it, but, it's so hard because, books are, it takes a while to get that thing really, and, in front of you. And I feel like teaching, like I get the end product so much quicker, even if I don't see them at the end. It's like I teach them and then I see them do something really cool, and I always wonder, well, what's something I did or said that's gonna, have that same type of impact. So I'm very fortunate to absolutely love what I do. I think if I didn't love it as much, I'd probably get more writing done. But it also is nice. The kids are always really into it, so they actually keep me going. They're like, we want to read your book. So I'm like, I'm tired. And then I'll be at home and I'll be like, I don't want to do this. And then, I'll get to school and they'll be like, did you write last night? I'm like, all right, get off my back.
Keeping you up to the mark, aren't they then?
Yep. No, they really do. They really do. I wouldn't have finished my first draft if, they hadn't kept pushing me and stuff. So it's fun, for me, because it really does go both ways. So
it's very easy to put off doing writing,
Yeah.
Where you say, oh, I'll just do a new ad for Twitter.
Yeah. Yep, that was me this week.
You have to make yourself do it, don't you?
Yeah,
But once
yeah.
you got started, it's getting started, I find. I mean, once
Yep.
actually those sentences are started to flow,
Yep.
fine. But just sitting down, finding your place where you last got to, and getting started, that's a struggle, isn't it?
Oh yeah, I forget who I was listening to, but they had such a great point. They go, I literally go, I reread the last paragraph, and then I write nothing else, just the, and then the bugs them, especially if it doesn't fit or it isn't right.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden they write a few more words to make it fit, and all of a sudden, I've started doing that, and I have to say, it has helped. And sometimes I'll write a really bogus word, for something that's just so outlandish it doesn't fit.
Yeah,
To purposely, yeah. Yeah. And I gotta say, ever since then, I have not had, writer's block or anything. And it's really, I was like, that's such a 3-letter word, or put a I, capital I, where the should be, and it will bug you. You'll fix it, and all of a sudden you're off to the races. So yeah, it's very interesting.
And the other time is when you really want to write, because I don't know about you, but my inspiration tends to come between waking and sleeping.
Yeah.
I wake up, I really need to get this written down, but I've got to go into town, or I've got to see someone, or something intervenes, which means you can't do it. That's enormously frustrating.
Oh yeah, then you come back later and the moment's kind of passed, and
that's it.
Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's have you heard about Samuel Taylor Coleridge and Xanadu?
No.
So his famous 18th century poem, Xanadu, he had this opium-fueled dream, essentially. And the whole of this epic poem came into his mind with crystal clarity.
Wow.
And he was staying at that time in a cottage in North Devon, and he leapt out of bed with his pen and his quill in order to commit this fabulous, shimmering vision of words to the page. And then a man from Porlock knocked on the door, and he had to open it, and detained him with some trivial business about a neighbour. And by the time he'd finally managed to shut the door and get him out, it'd all gone.
Oh man!
In the first few lines. So it's in Coolbaugh. How does it start? In Xanadu did Kublai Khan decree, or something? A pleasure. Okay. It's a very famous piece of poetry. But I will find it interesting that this poor guy had this wonderful thing. He's never going to compose anything better. But this man from Porlock intervened to destroy a famous piece of English literature.
Oh wow. That's how I feel like. There was about 6 months ago, I had the best dream ever. I mean, it was so detailed. The scenes were amazing. I would dare to say it would have been the best movie of all time.
Oh yeah.
And I woke up and I started to write, and I was like, yeah, this doesn't work, because, the angle shots. And I mean, it was just, I watch a lot of movies, and, I have all over the years, and I think I'm more of a visual thinker. So I think that's why sometimes, finding ways to say what I'm trying to, I feel like it's taken me years to develop the skill, but I was so frustrated. I was like, if I could just write this down, it'd be, really, really good, and people would read it, but I couldn't figure it out. And then of course, after that 10 minutes, like everything's gone. So the idea was there, but not everything else that made it cool. So I feel like I totally understand that, but it was just my own subconscious self that ruined it. So
have you ever had not being able to sleep? Because again, you've got this brilliant idea that's going round and round and round your head, and you've got this conflict going on, because part of your mind is saying, you'll be fine, you'll remember this tomorrow, just go to sleep. And the other part's saying, no, you're going to forget it. You need to get out of bed now and write it down.
Nope, I had to. The other day, it was last week, we're on vacation, and I knew I had to drive the next day, and I knew it was going to not be fun, like 4 hours, but I had this urban fantasy story. I got this prequel novella, 1 of 3, with this monster hunter who's a recon Marine. Well, I finally had fixed everything where I felt like everything fit just right. And I was like, I at least need to get the 2 hardest scenes done, because I had the feeling of the words, not just, what was going on. So I literally spent like probably, I don't think I went to bed till like 2 a.m. We had to be up at like, 7. Yeah. And I mean, I just busted through almost like 3,000 words, and I got both
in the middle of the
scenes done.
night.
Yeah. And I mean, it was just like, I just couldn't, because at first I couldn't write, and then it was something. And then I think, I had to get like 300 words down. And then it was like, I saw somebody say something on Book Talk, and then I just thought, oh, that actually really makes sense. And then I saw something random, and I had like this little, I was trying to figure out how, so I have this guy, and there's a part at the end that happens, and he needs to get this object at the beginning of the story, and it needs to be nonchalantly, and it's going to be the key item, right?
Yeah.
And he forgets about it, and then does this thing at the end, and that's the whole reason that he barely survives this situation. And that's going to lead to all these other things. And I was like, the entire breadth of this guy's story depends on this one item. I was like, how am I going to get this item nonchalantly in his hand, where where you can be like, oh, I gave this to you, earlier in the story, and you didn't know how important it was. And for some reason, I just saw something random, and I was like, oh, that's such a good idea. And I just had to get it done. And I'm glad I did, because now when I go back, tonight and tomorrow, it's like I already have the hard part done. I can finish up the third scene, and then I can actually get on to finishing the last like 5,000 words. But it was so weird, because I was thinking for like 2 weeks, and I went and wrote a couple other scenes, and it's a shorter, it's a novella, so it's shorter. So I could kind of go around. I knew what was going to happen, but I just didn't know how to really put the words down. But my friend was like, you might as well just do that every time now. I'm like, yeah, but it was a struggle bus the next day, let me tell you, because my wife, we're having a baby, so she's, oh, you got to drive, I'm not feeling well. I'm like, okay. And I was just like, I'm surprised we made it. We had to be back here for summer school the next day, and I get to my buddy's house, and I didn't know writing that night. He's like, oh, aren't you gonna do some writing? He's so used to me doing it when everybody kind of settles down. I was like, not tonight. I was like, just gonna go to bed. I mean, and this past Monday, this Monday was a struggle bus too.
Oh,
so.
yeah.
All right, so for that third question there, you talked about it just a little bit, but what are your Alex Truman Chronicles about?
I guess there's definitely something autobiographical about them.
Oh, that's cool.
Because I think there's something rather lovely about imagining how you might have done things differently if you could insert yourself into your teenage person.
Oh, that's a good one.
Where with all the experiences of life you've had, how you would have done things differently. And so there's a little bit of wish fulfillment in there. Now, I was always, my teachers would have agreed that I was very daydreamy, having some difficulty in focusing on a real world, which I still do, I'm afraid. But Alex Truman, he finds that his daydreaming, sometimes when you're in a daydream, you kind of feel that time slows down.
Yeah. Yep.
And for Alex, it actually does stop. And I've always been interested in time, very interested in time. And it occurred to me, wouldn't it be great, I'm sure I'm not the first person to this ever occurred to, but if you could stop time, because there would be so many opportunities for mischief, apart from anything else, if the whole world froze into immobility around you, particularly in a school setting, because you could really settle some scores.
Yeah.
And these are, some of the opportunities that Alex takes when he finds that he has this amazing ability. But most opportunities also bring with them threats. And Alex soon finds that although he can stop time, after a while he finds that he can't restart it. And that brings with it, well, obviously he finds it rather upsetting, as you would, but it brings up a whole lot of other issues for him. So he finds himself trapped in this world, which I call interstitia, which is a world that exists in between individual moments of which time is constructed. So we tend to think of time, don't we, as an arrow.
Yep.
Yeah, time's arrow. And what Alex finds is that he's stuck on this arrow, but there's an arrow, sorry, not parallel, which is advancing at right angles to that arrow. So another time it's advancing at right angles to the time that we're used to, if that makes any sense. And so this world he finds himself trapped in, of interstitia, which is trapped between moments. So from his point of view, he walks out into the street and everything is still. There are people caught in their whatever movements they are in, pushing strollers, crossing streets. There are birds caught in their flight. There are, the whole sky is frozen. Everything is frozen in this moment of time. But he finds that he's not the only one who can do this. And so that also he shares this world with various other people who are trapped there as well. And so A Moment in Time tells a story of Alex's adventures in this place, the people he meets, and the way that he eventually makes his escape. So that's Alex's first adventure, as it were. But he finds that this world he's been in, this interstitia, it leaves a mark on him. And also he's attracted the interest of other beings from a higher plane of reality altogether, which is called Elysium. So you have reality, you have interstitia, and you have Elysium. And Elysium is the realm of the angels and the archangels who govern the universe. And so the Alex Truman Chronicles tell the story of Alex's adventures in these three realms, and how he eventually discovers the vast potential he has within himself, and matures as an individual and as an entity.
Well, that's very interesting. I think if you need more than that, this might be the wrong podcast for people in our audience.
I've always been interested in science. I'm interested in the idea of science. I don't understand it. But when I was at school, I used to get the New Scientist magazine, and I always used to skip through most of the articles and go to the end where it said, this is going to make this happen, this is be possible, and that's going to happen. So I'm interested in the possibilities of science. And I think time is one of the most fascinating aspects of all, because, whatever you make up about science, you'll find that some physicist has made up something even weirder.
Yeah. I was listening to something was bugging me on the Big Bang Theory like that, where it was like something that like the character Sheldon had said about like one of the different dimensions, and he's like, yeah, well, like somebody said something random like as a joke, and he took it seriously. He goes, no, actually this dimension, if the math was like this, it would be like this and this. And it couldn't get out of my mind, so I looked it up, and it was like a real theory. And I just thought, that is literally the craziest world or reality I could ever think of. And they had the physics to prove it, I guess. And I was just like, that's nuts. Yeah, so I can definitely understand that.
There's a fine line, isn't it, between magic and science, because people used to call magic what nowadays we would call science, just because it's magic is science that hasn't been invented yet, really, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, because there's a new planet that they discovered that I guess is a lot like Saturn, or sorry, Jupiter. And they said though that like from what they've seen of it so far and observed, it seems like it's, which I don't know how it would even be possible, but it'd be like 10,000 degrees on the planet at all times. And then, but yet the rock, they're like the center, and the planet itself is still there. So to me, that's just so interesting. That they were able to see some rocky surface or something, or determine that. And it really got it kind of reminded me of like the fire elementals, or whatever their plane is, and and D&D. And they're supposed to be like molten hail raining down on fire, allegedly, with all the storms and stuff. It was very interesting.
Yeah, I love that idea. And just astronomy is amazing, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
The sheer size of it is, well, the human brain cannot comprehend infinity, can it?
Yep.
And when you try to explain to kids, you say, well, how big is the universe? And they say, well, it's infinite. What do you mean infinite? So it just goes on forever. I said, well, if you kept on going, what would you come to? He said, well, you just keep on going. That's it. No one knows where that is. So again, we have this interface between what we can understand and the vastness out there of what we can't bring within the sphere of our comprehension.
Yeah, yeah. I always wondered that with Star Wars, because there was like one, like they came to the edge of the galaxy, and I'm like, well, then there's something beyond there, and that's where like in the later books for legends and stuff, where like the Yuuzhan come from, and the Force doesn't work on them because they're not from the same galaxy and everything. And I could ever I'm like, so what's in between? And then there was that book Outbound Flight, which I still haven't read, but like it talks about some of the Jedi Masters that go in between and get to this other like galaxy or whatever. And I'm just like, I still to this day always think about that. I mean, it was I think I read those when I was like, maybe like a 7th through 10th grade or something like that. And I always tried to wrap my head around that concept, and it was very difficult. And I'm like, what do you mean there's nothing there and then there's something there, or it just goes on forever? It is a very interesting thing to think about.
Absolutely.
Or what's his name with the restaurant at the end of the universe?
Oh yeah, Skies of the Galaxy. Yeah.
Yeah, I always think about that too. Like, would there be a restaurant at the edge of the galaxy? Like, yeah, I like things like that.
Yeah, I love Douglas Adams. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was quite influential on me when I was at college, reading that, and they had a brilliant radio adaptation on Radio 4.
Oh, that's cool.
Radio 4, and yeah, he was such an imaginative guy, wasn't he?
Oh yeah.
And again, before his time, really, I think.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I went back and reread it 2 summers ago for summer school, and it blew my mind. I probably hadn't read it since like right before the movie came out. I remember reading it with a couple of friends, and then like 2 years later, I think the movie came out, and I loved the movie. Still didn't like it as much as the book, but then when I reread it, I was like, well, this is why. Like, they probably did a really good job. But
I'm with you on the movie. I think sometimes it spoils things making movies of them, because you see it in your head, don't you?
Yeah.
You conjure up a vision in your head of what Ford Prefect should look like.
Yep.
And when you see someone else, it's not really what I wanted to see.
Yeah. Yep. Well, that's why I always tell people, they go, why do you read the book before watching the movie? I'm like, I don't want it to ruin it. And, I feel like if I visualize first and then I go to read the book, and it's obviously going to be so different, I feel like I can't continue on with the book, especially if it's an amazing story. I do the same thing with audiobooks too. Like, I'm not going to say which author, but I had an audiobook that I thought, well, I'll just listen to the first, 3 chapters, and then I'll read the rest of the book. It like totally, it was not, they have since switched narrators and redone them. And I think they were the company that is no longer in business. So that was probably part of it. But, they wanted somebody that, was famous, and this person wants somebody that could do a good job with the book. And the famous person did not. And it probably took me 2 years to then read the actual book. I needed like a palate cleanser. And so I always do that now. I love listening to them again too, because it's like talking to authors like yourself. I like to talk to authors before reading their books. I feel like I get a lot more out of it, and like not just from a reader standpoint, but also a writer standpoint. And it definitely enhances the experience. So I'm kind of set my ways now for those things, because I enjoy the books that much more. And, that's the whole point, I think. So,
yeah, I think that's an interesting point about audiobooks. I hadn't considered that really. Yeah, so that is interesting.
And some people enhance, like some people's voice enhances the story, or, and then I end up in like Kevin J. Hearn's narrator. I'm totally blanking on his name, but I love those books. I was kind of scared, I read all of them a couple times and then did the audiobooks, and I was pleasantly surprised. I felt like the narrator did an amazing job, and with all the characters, men, women, the creatures, gods, goddesses, just did a fabulous job.
It does require someone with quite a vocal range, really, doesn't it? To voice a very wide range of characters, or even creatures. So
yeah, and like David Eddings, whoever his original narrator was for the Belgariad and the Malorian, I loved him. Like, I think his Paul Guerra was probably one of the best men doing a female voice I've ever heard. It was like perfect. And he had like one of the widest ranges that I've ever heard. And it definitely, I love those. And I thought, well, I was like, I don't have time to reread them again, but I want to listen to them. So I bought them, and I thought, oh, they're probably not going to be as good, And he had to be the best audio narrator that I've ever heard, to be quite honest, for a big, and it's a more of a like multi-linguistic cast too, because there's all these different characters from all over, different cultures in the world. And I mean, he really did a good job with the syntax. Most people would just read the same like English version or something, or, for words. I mean, he did a really good job making you think that, he was, 100 different people. So yeah, definitely enhanced the experience. It was almost like a, movie in your head.
I've just read Deborah J. Lightfoot's Water Spell series,
Oh,
and she does an audio book as well, Simon Dudany, who's an English narrator, and he's very, very good at it. Again, a huge vocal range, and he very convincingly applies a voice to each of her characters.
oh, that's awesome.
Really, I sometimes I approach an audiobook with a little trepidation if I've read the book before, but I thought it worked really well.
I think it's the same thing as like, reading the book before a movie. It's not quite as jarring, but I still think it is, because you don't just attribute, the character to a visual sense. I think you also do it with the auditory one.
You do,
right?
that's absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's hard sometimes. Yeah. I definitely had a couple that took me out. Like I had one recently for a certain Englishman, and I absolutely love their series. I love reading their series. Well, everybody was narrated amazingly except for the main character.
Oh no, that's
And and only because I love the book so much did I get the first audiobook. And he ended up evening out, because you could tell the character got a little older. So I think that was like it was more of a direction thing by, the whoever directed them. But I'm like, I hope in book 2, I'm like, I cannot do, this many books, because it's a series, if they continue to, to do this voice. I'm hoping eventually, because the character's a little younger, that, they even it out. But it definitely jarred me. I had to take a break, and I went back to John Scalzi's Old Man's War, book 1 for the audiobook. But yeah, it's could make or break you.
I say, do you find that with I think maybe it's my concentration, perhaps it's my age, but concentration with audiobooks is when you're reading a book, you can read at your own pace, and if your attention wanders for a few moments, when you come back, you're still in the same place. But if you're listening to an audiobook, you lose concentration for a few moments, and suddenly, what's happening in the story?
Hit me yesterday. I had something had happened on the road, and I was like, oh, I hope that person's okay, and I was kind of looking, and then I was in traffic, and then I like rolled my window down. I'm talking to them. They're like, yeah, no, we're good. Like we got help on the way and stuff. They're like a flat tire or something, but it looked like mangled. So I thought they got hit, and like somebody did like a hit and run. And then by the time I got back to it, I'm like, wait a minute. Like, how did this character get injured? I'm like, how did this happen?
Exactly
and
that.
I was like, should I rewind 5 minutes? I was like, no, I already know. I'm like, I know that, this relative thing happened. But yeah.
Someone should invent an audiobook that knows when you switched off from
it. Exactly. Which is kind of like John Scalzi's Old Man's War, where they had like a brain pad, like an iPad in their brain. That's yeah. Cool. So I was like, which is ironic. So I was like, oh, I could have really used that, My friend was talking about that too. He was like, yeah, this would be really cool. So we got that 4th one in there in terms of the daydream. I'm really glad you explained that. I felt like you explained that really well. I was trying to explain it to a friend of mine. I was like, hold on. I was like, because we're going to a movie tonight. I said, I'm going to talk to the author because he's like, oh, that sounds really cool. He goes, I really want to know more about that. So that's actually my friend Dan's question. So thank you, Dan. But yeah, that was really cool. So I'm glad you explained that. I'm glad that he had that suggestion. So what sort of world building did you do for Anesthesia? Did you were you thinking of a couple of things in particular to put in there? Did you kind of just start to write and then, kind of see, what happened from there? How did you go about your world building process for these different realities?
Well, for Interstitia in particular, Interstitia is a vast enterprise. because, you know, if you imagine the whole of time, and
Yeah.
between every moment in time, there is a version of interstitia, which is creating its own time, running at 90 degrees to real time. So interstitia is organized by the Elysium, and it's a particular care or department in Elysium. And there's this guy called the Archangel Tony, who it falls to him to look after interstitia. So interstitia, the Earth itself is divided into sectors, and each sector falls to the responsibility of a particular angel or entity to look after and to govern, essentially. So the one that Alex Truman falls into, there's a really rather unpleasant character called Ganymede, who's in charge of his sector. So it's probably a few square miles, but it's his duty to look after everyone there and essentially to keep them occupied, because these people who live in this space, they've got nothing to do, essentially. And he finds jobs for them to do because he's a little bit of a sadist. He finds things to do which are not necessarily congenial to their tastes. So there's a lad who's not very good at maths, so he finds he has to do an awful lot of maths. There's someone who, like, is an old woman, very frail, elderly old woman, and the task that she gets is shoveling sand. So he's a little bit of a sadist, a bit of a bully, and this chimes with Alex's own experiences, because he's a little bit bullied at school. So he finds that the world is emerged into or transitioned into in interstitia contains a whole lot of injustices, really, which he finds himself having to work to address during the course of the story. So that's how it works. So interstitia is one of the provinces, if you like, of Elysium, and Elysium is the angelic realm from which the whole of reality is organized.
That's very interesting. Did you have any particular fantasy or science fiction like stories, or anybody that gave you, these types of ideas? Did you kind of go from scratch? I know, like, I've have something where I'm like, oh, I really like that, but I wish they had done it this way. And I've kind of gotten like a, conglomeration of those things in terms of like world building. But I was just curious where some of your inspirations.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably not as well read as you or many other people who will see this video, but I like to think this is an original idea. I might be wrong. I'm very happy to be told I'm wrong. But when I came up with this idea, I thought, well, I think that's something quite new.
I mean, I've not heard of anything, I mean, time travel is one thing, but
but it's a very sort of different take on time travel.
Yeah, totally. That's what really interests me. I was like, oh, this isn't which I like time travel, always big Back to the Future fan. I love seeing how time machine, love seeing how different people do it, but it does seem like you came up with a more original idea, in terms of, it's not just your everyday. That's what I was explaining to my friend, which we'll probably talk about tonight at dinner. It's not your typical going back in time and, having to correct it, which is interesting to me, because it seems like you came up with a more original idea, which I think is harder to do today than it used to be. So
it's increasingly hard to do, isn't it? I always think, how do people keep making new music using the same notes?
Yeah, that's true.
The more people create stuff, you'd think, wouldn't you, that you'd run out of things to create, but it doesn't seem to be happening, is it? People are still working out there, making entirely new and original stuff for us to enjoy, aren't we?
Yeah. Well, I want to do that actually next year in particular. I'm trying to do some things to set it up, but I would love at some point to get with a co-author, but we do two separate books, but like somebody gives us the same idea and goes, okay, here's the concept. So like you would give us that concept, and then we would write the book, same book, but our own way. And
from different perspectives.
I just think, and like, and then I think your world building would be different, get the basic kernel, because like when you're saying, like these angels from Elysium and stuff, I'm like, okay, like my writer brain starts to whirl, and I'm like, okay, like all of a sudden I've started to come up with all these other beings that, you know, maybe are there, or all these pasts or histories, or, you know, things like that. It just really makes my mind wander. And I do think that's why so many people, that's like, you know, I heard somebody, they're like, I tell my ideas to everybody. I'm like, all right. I'm like, well, if you think you're going to make it better, like I actually would like to see if I could, it's like for coaching, I said, I'll tell you exactly what I'm going to do and when I'm going to do it. And I always expect my team and myself to still be able to beat you, because that shouldn't matter, right? It shouldn't matter who's more efficient. And I just think it's interesting, because I'm always like, yeah, if you think, you know, my friend Mark Timoney, for instance, we both had a lot of inspiration from Wheel of Time. So he has come up with these concepts of light and dark, good and evil, which he uses like the evil as like some, I'll probably butcher it, but like the void, roughly. And I have a god that's named the void that I call Shadowborn. You know, and I have Lightborn, I have a goddess called the Source, and I use a lot of philosophy and mythology there. And I'm like, well, we came up with a lot of the same terminology and ideas because of the source material. But if you look at Robert Jordan, we both have done it completely different. And that to me is just fascinating.
I think that's good. I think that's really interesting. Yeah. And with the entities that you're mentioning, Shadowborn and Lightborn, I think without even realizing it, or perhaps we are realizing it, we're all constantly drawing on the classical past as well, aren't we?
Yes.
On
Yep.
ancient Greece and Rome, and
Yep.
well, the cultures as well. There seems to have been a basic human desire to see spirits in the sky and in the earth.
Yep.
If you look at the comparative religion, you can see how the relative dominance of those two things affects the whole of the development of society, essentially.
Yeah. 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 It's very interesting. Yeah. I just one time just want to just have, or even just do like two people with the same short story or something, you know, like the same
It
idea.
would be really interesting, as what you suggested there, to do a collaborative project where two people are coming at it from different, the same basic structure, but
Yep.
coming at it from different sides or different aspects.
Well, my friend gave me the idea. He goes, what you should do is you should set up different writing exercises. Like, so get different things from maybe like your audience. So the world, for instance, is like, let's say, is mostly covered in water, you know, and there's rocky land and it goes up. There's basically just mountains left, but there's a lot of mountains. And that's like the world itself. All right. And then, you know, come up with a certain class of people or a basic story. And you just give 4 authors, you know, these different writing prompts, and then bring them together in like a online seminar. And then they talk about what they did with the initial information. And then they each read their short story. And then you would be able to compare and contrast in the next episode. I'm like, I think I really want to do it, but I feel like it has to be structured well enough, you know, for people to learn from. Maybe it's the teacher in me, but I want to do it at some point next summer, because I'm like, that to me just sounds absolutely fascinating. I've never heard of anybody doing a study like that. And I think it would show people that, you know, your ideas, my ideas, you know, like they're still going to be unique. And it goes back to what you said, you know, about how is it possible for us to, you know, each create these different stories with, you know, most of us have, you know, very similar alphabets, you know, and it's like, you can still do it. I mean, it's absolutely fascinating to me as a history teacher to see that, you know, it's interesting that people still try to do the same thing as Shakespeare, but they're not able to. You know, to a degree, or maybe they do something better than him. You know, it's absolutely fascinating as a writer just to see the craft that way, I guess.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, that was an excellent answer. So if you could go into the future and see your career as an author, what would be one thing that you would want to see that would like had happened? Like, would it be, you know, you want to sell 1 million books? Would it be you want a movie adaptation? Like, if you could go into the future, there's one thing that you would want to see your future self be able to accomplish as an author. What would that be?
I think it would be lovely to, now, after what we said about movies, not always representing the quality of the books, but it would be amazing to see what a a movie director would do with the books.
That would be really cool.
Would be amazing. Because I guess when you're writing, you've got a story and you are clothing it in words. And when a movie director's doing it, they're clothing it in images. And
Yeah.
you know, it'd be really interesting to see how they did that, and how it would differ from your own vision of it.
Oh, that's true.
I mean, I wonder how close George R.R. Martin's vision of Westeros and so forth, those images are, because presumably he had considerable input into that. So I mean, how that would be such an interesting process to work with the film director and hopefully be able to exert influence, so that what you saw in your head is actually reflected out there on the screen. So that would be a dream. I'd really love that. But I don't. Is there something of being a little bit of a show? I always like people to read my work, and I think there is something about that. There's something a little bit exhibitionist about writing, in which in that you want people to see what you have seen and to read the words that you have written and to derive enjoyment from that. So that's what really matters to me. I don't care if you're making any money out of it or not, to be honest. But I just would like to have the opportunity to put something before people and for them to look at it and hopefully to derive enjoyment from it.
I think that's a great answer. And I mean, I definitely agree with you. I think that some people did not like The Wheel of Time because it wasn't faithful to the books. And I said, I still thought that, it was very cool to see different characters brought to life, different situations. I still think it helps the genre of, bringing fantasy and science fiction, or better films or movies, wherever later on. I just think it helps. And I think the thing that was the coolest is to see that because of the show, so many people have went back and read, Robert's work, and then of course his wife just did an amazing job, helping him edit. And, I just think it's so cool, I just think it's a cool generational thing. I think now it just, it's like both Dune movies, I think it really just helps keep the genre there. And I think it really helps to get new readers. And when somebody the other day kind of argued with me about that, I said, well, listen, I said, like my friend Mark, I said, well, Mark's got an amazing series, starting, and The Blood of the Spears, got Starbinder, prequel novella out. I'm like, people who love Wheel of Time are eventually going to find his books. And, I think I saw it's like 1.5 million books for Wheel of Time were sold, within, a month. I don't even think the show was out yet, it was like a month before, the month after, whatever, I'm like, that's a huge chunk of fantasy readers that had never read it before, who all of a sudden now are going to be looking for something like it. So I'm like, it's interesting to see. So yeah, it'd be really cool for you though, for your, stories. I think, like, I'm already kind of picturing some different things that I've seen, what Elysium could look like, or, or, just the different realities, or maybe traveling them or whatever, like it'd be really cool.
When you're writing, you visualize things, you have to, but there are some things that you don't really visualize because you don't need to. So if you are visualizing a conference room and you're writing about that, you're not necessarily going to have to make a decision about the carpet, are you? Or the ceiling lights. But some film directors are going to have to do that, aren't they? Just the minutiae of everyday life has got to be put in place. So I don't know. It's when you're writing, it's like focus, isn't it? It's focus pulling. You're focusing on what you want. But a film director's got to get the whole world in, haven't they?
That's true. Yeah, they pull back.
Yeah. But I certainly agree with you about, I mean, we're a very visual society, aren't they? And I don't think, I mean, lots of people do read, but not as nearly as many people as ought to. And
I agree.
I mean, the number of people who haven't got any books in their house is just scandalous. But of course, they're all watching films and TV. And if a film or a TV program, Netflix, whatever, can encourage them to pick up a book, that's the best thing of all, isn't it?
Yeah, we'll look at Game of Thrones as a TV show, The Boys, you know, that's helped a lot of, you know, different graphic novels, Invincible, you know, another one helping, you know, sell more graphic novels, you know, not just, you know, that, you know, Invincible itself, but other, you know, I say more independent comics in particular, you know, that maybe people hadn't, you know, seen or heard of. People have been asking me for recommendations. I'm a huge Valiant person and I love Valiant comics. I love indie comics. So I've been able to help, you know, indie comics and authors sell a lot more because of, you know, the TV show. So I'm hoping that that kind of thing that's why I tell people, I'm like, all it does is expands our industry. And I'm like, you know, eventually some of those watchers are going to pick up a book. I go, even if it's Martin's book, maybe then later on they pick up my book. You know, there's got to be some sort of, you know, of a gate to get people in. And it's just was crazy to see with Wheel of Time and with Lord of the Rings, you know, having people gatekeep. I'm like, no, get out of there so people can just come in, you know, and see what this is about, have fun, and then, you know, let them decide later on whether or not it was X, Y, and Z. But it's very, very interesting. But I love seeing these things, you know, fantasy and sci-fi, you know, come on to the big screen. I think it's so cool just to, you know, it's back in the day, there was like, you know, I grew up in the 80s, you know, late 80s, early 90s. And it's like, I was just so spoiled by the amazing, like, it's no wonder I write fantasy and sci-fi, right? Just, you had cartoons like crazy, G.I. Joe, you know, Ninja Turtles, you know, just all sorts of things. But yeah.
It was such a treat for me. Growing up, reading Lord of the Rings.
Oh, yeah.
You know, back in the 70s, I never thought that anyone would be able to make a movie of those things because the CGI wasn't there.
Yeah. Yep.
So when the Lord of the Rings movies came out, it was an absolute revelation.
Love them.
Really was.
Favorite trilogy. Two Towers is one of my favorite movies of all time. I'll just literally just rewatch it. Like,
absolutely wonderful. And in fact, you know, it pretty much was as I'd seen it, as I'd visualized it when I saw those films. So genius, Peter Jackson.
Yeah, totally agree. Totally. All right, so we'll go to that last one there, Martin. Do you have any promos, updates, news, current projects, anything like that that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, I'd love to. Well, as you know, A Moment in Time is out there already. That's the first of the Alex Truman Chronicles. The second one, Whirlwinds of Zanzibar, is already out there on pre-order. The actual book launch is next Thursday, the 21st of July. But I also, you asked me if I write in what genres I write in, but I also the Alex Truman Chronicles is crossover YA and adult, I would say. But I've also written an adult novel as well.
Oh, okay.
Which is called Hearts of Ice and Stone. And that's due to be published in the autumn, all being well.
Oh, that's cool.
Also by Provoco Publishing. And that's a sort of gothic novel, really. So again, it's quite hard to categorize. It's got the theme is essentially it's set in a sort of 18th century version of Britain.
Oh, that's cool.
And it imagines a world in which when people die, if the bodies are properly looked after, there is a possibility, a small percentage chance, that they might be reanimated, they might come back to life again.
Oh, wow.
It's an expensive process to have the bodies looked after in this way. So it essentially asks the question of what would the attitude of society be to the dead if there was a chance that they might come back to life again? Because it causes all sorts of societal problems, because looking after the dead over the centuries becomes increasingly burdensome for society at large, just the cost of it, the accommodation in these sleep halls. And one person comes along who changes the whole thing, because she can tell which ones which ones are susceptible to reanimation and which ones are not. And that puts her in a very interesting position. So essentially it tells the story of this this girl who finds that she can tell which hearts are of ice, which are susceptible to thawing, if you like, and those which are of stone, which are not. And so she gets accused of witchcraft, as you might imagine at that time. So that's all good to go in the autumn.
Oh, that's really cool. Well, that sounds awesome. That's good to know that book 2 also for pre-order. So I got that written down. So definitely want to check that out. So yeah, that's super cool. Well, I will be reading book 1 here as soon as I can finish my novella. So I need to get my students to keep me focused the next couple of weeks. So I will be reviewing book 1 for you on the channel. I'm just gonna be doing like 5-10 minutes for each book. So it is on my TBR. So before that comes out, I'll let you know, trying to help with, any way we can get the word out there. But those both, that sounds amazing. It sounds like a really cool. So I have to pre-order both of those now. So
Yeah.
Glad I got a Kindle. Well, Martin, thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure to talk to you today, my friend. I really look forward to, seeing more, what you come up with, brilliant ideas. Really excited to, after reading book 1, to, pick your brain and, kind of see what's
It'd be
going
lovely
on.
to chat again. I've really enjoyed it.
Oh, excellent.
I just want to your writing project.
Oh, yeah. I'm like really trying. I'm like, my buddy just said, he was like, "Are you sure you're gonna go movie tonight?" I'm like, yes. I said, I feel like I need some stimulation, in between writing sessions. And I feel like the Marvel movies with Thor always do a good job mixing fantasy and sci-fi. And I always get after the third one, I got the best writing ideas that I probably ever had. So I'm actually really looking forward to tonight between our conversation and seeing the movie. I bet you I have an absolutely brilliant writing session after that about 10 o'clock tonight. So I just want to remind our audience to make sure you check out Martin's socials in the description, wherever you're listening or watching this podcast. Please make sure that you share. And as always, please make sure that when you're reading Martin's books, that you're leaving a review and then sharing that as well. Because like we've been really trying to stress, that's the best way to help out an author other than buying their books. And a lot of times it actually leads to even more book sales. So Martin, thank you so much for coming on today, my friend. Anytime you want to come back and, chit chat, about writing or, time travel or anything like that, just let me know and we'll get you back on. And, good luck with everything. Again, tag me. I'll be moving your episode around in order to help you pre-order. So I'll actually send you an email. That way we can pick at which point in the next couple of months you wanted to go out. That way we could try and help at any point. So I look forward to that, and hopefully we'll help you out a little bit with sales or, social media follows, something like that. So excellent. Well, Martin, you have a great rest of the evening, my friend, and I will talk to you on social media.
Thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Excellent. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.